There we go. I should have audio now, but it doesn't look like I have camera. I'm having issues with my setup. So, yes, it looks like I might need to restart my program, which means the live stream is probably going to cut off. I will see if I can come back to it. Alright, I got my camera on. Looks like we're still streaming in the right place. Okay, I never got to check my mic level, so you guys have to let me know if this is like just way too loud. Alright, here we are. I'm gonna take my earbud out. Okay, here I am. I made it. I have been scurrying around all day trying to finish getting ready because I got taken out by a little stomach cold flu thing for a few days, and those were the days that I was primarily meaning to work on this, and I did not. So the last few days I've been scrambling to kind of get it all together, and so hopefully it came together and it makes sense. I wish I had a little bit more time to work on it, but it is what it is, and I'm very excited to dive into today's topic. I'm just gonna hang around for a couple minutes, see if anyone else would like to join. See, Max is here. Hi, Max. I'm excited you get to listen to this today. Hopefully you get to stay for a while. I'm very curious about your thoughts. This is one of the areas of storytelling where I'm like, this might all be just extremely subjective, so this is just my viewpoint and my opinion and the way I think about it, and hopefully it's helpful to people. But story structure is what what got the most votes in the poll that I did a few months ago, besides the last video I did. So I did a video that was kind of just chatting about what people thought their weak areas in writing and storytelling are, and we just kind of chatted about ways to strengthen those areas, ways to kind of delve into research to know what to do to strengthen those areas. So that was a really fun live stream a few months ago. And then what was in the poll after that was story structure. So I decided that I would chat a little bit about it because I love story structure. It is my favorite. I might just jump into it, and we'll see if anyone decides to join us. So I gotta do this little intro thingy in case I decide to chop up this live stream into other videos, just so I have it. So it's been a long time since I've done my intro. Might have to do it a few times. So what's up, homegrown filmmaker? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Poling Swet, and I am a self-taught screenwriter and director, and I share what I'm learning right now here on my channel in hopes that it is helpful to you. Okay, I'm gonna do it again. What's up, homegrown filmmaker? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Poling Swet, and I am a self-taught writer and director, teaching myself about writing and filmmaking and sharing what I'm learning here on the channel in hopes that it's helpful to you. Alright, so that'll give me a couple options. So it's been a while since I've done a video with the notes and everything, so you have to bear with me as I navigate everything. I started getting kind of slick at this last year, but it's been a hot minute. So when people said they wanted to learn more about story structure or study more about story structure, my first thought was kind of just, hey, we could just go live and browse around the internet together looking at different formulas and plot lines and whatnot, and we can just talk about them and I can share kind of what I think about them. But being someone who, you know, kind of geeks out about story structure and having structured things, I was like, you know what? I feel like this talk needs a little bit more structure. So I went ahead and kind of wrote everything down that I would like to talk about. And what I ended up and how I ended up framing this is I wanted to talk about something that I don't feel like I've really read or seen anywhere, which is the big picture idea of what story structure is, because everyone has kind of a different take, you know? They're like, story structure, and if I'm talking to another writer, do I even understand what they're talking about? I'm not so sure. I think we all kind of have a little bit different idea of what story structure means. So today is about what I think story structure is, and kind of a scale out, big picture view. We're not going to get into a lot of detail today, I don't think, but just looking at the big pieces of it, the 3 pillars of story structure, so that, from my experience at least, you know whether the formula you're using, or even if you're not using a formula, you're just kind of winging it, you know that you're incorporating everything, at least everything that I can think of. There may be pieces I haven't thought of. Oh, Lily's here. Hi, Lily. I'm glad you could be here, background listening. I'm excited about today's topic. I love structure. So that's what I'm kind of hoping will be the outcome for anyone listening, for you listening, will be, if you know kind of what the big pieces are, what story structure is supposed to cover, then it might give you some ideas and avenues of where your weak areas are, where your strong areas are, what you can incorporate, some gaps that you may have, and just hopefully allow you to make kind of connections between all the pieces, so that, I don't know if this is true. This is what I'm just thinking. I think that story structure tends to be really individualized, because it's all about how you approach story. And so in believing that, I think that if you know kind of what the big pillars are, the big pieces, you can then look at all of the different story formulas, plot lines, all those sort of things, and you can kind of pull and take whatever you want to create your own understanding of story structure. At least that's what I've done. When I'm working on a story, I incorporate several different kind of models all together and different pieces of them. So, the first thing we're going to do is I wanted to kind of walk through my learning journey with story structure, like where I started, kind of where I am now, just so you can get an idea of where I'm coming from. And as I'm going through this, I'm curious to know if any of you have experienced like similar confusions and hang-ups that I had. I just don't know, because I've only had my experience. So I'm really curious to know if it actually is as individualized as I think it is, because everyone's coming at it from a slightly different angle. Different things about story structure seem obvious to different people, whereas I had a lot of gaps and I had a lot of hang-ups that weren't obvious to me, probably were obvious to other people. So I'm curious to know that, and what your guys' journey with story structure has been. So, I started writing short films about 12 years ago with no instruction at all, except for it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, which I think is probably something we've all heard. It's a story, it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, or it's not a story. So I kind of wrote from an intuitive sense of story that came from watching and reading stories, watching movies, reading books. You kind of get, a feel for the flow, a feel for the shape of a story, what a story looks like, what it feels like, and it definitely for me, it started to kind of manifest as being able to it started to manifest as being able to critique stories. So I'd watch a movie and go, something was wrong with the structure or the pacing or something in there wasn't right, because I know what a story is, what it feels like. So this kind of intuitive writing, not really caring about any formal learning on story structure, I would say lasted for about 4 years. And it kind of ended with Weeping Willow, when we wrote, like, we wrote Weeping Willow that way, I would say, where we just kind of had a general sense of, here's the beginning, middle, end, here's some characters, they're going through a thing. And it helped that the structure for Weeping Willow was kind of already created for us, because it was a Hunger Games fan film. You already kind of know the events that happen in the Hunger Games. We didn't actually have to make up that much, like, meat in the story. So after we made Weeping Willow is kind of when I decided that I wanted writing and filmmaking to be my vocation, and so I started taking it more seriously and started studying a little bit more. And so if I could put an image to how I understood story structure back at the time, like when we wrote Weeping Willow and like that entire year maybe, just all around that time, it would look something like this, which, looking at this now, is absolutely hilarious to me. It doesn't look like much. So I guess I don't know if other people see story structure in graphs like this, or like in images, if you could actually kind of plot down how you think of it, but this is always how my head has kind of seen it. I kind of knew what a plot line or a plot graph looked like, because there's lots of those. If you Google like story structure, you're probably going to get a plot graph. So I vaguely knew what that was like, and you can see it's kind of a vague line, kind of vaguely doing plot things, maybe. And then there's the character arc kind of just existing in the subtext space below there. There's not a lot going on there. And then there's the little climax flag just, planted at the peak where, your hero should probably learn a lesson or say something meaningful, or, wrap up the whole film together somehow with a thought. I don't know. You can see this is all just really vague in my head. There's the 3 acts, Act 1, 2, and 3. Again, there's not really anything marking where they end or how they end, or they're very disconnected from the plot line. And so I think they were just kind of marking, again, that simple idea of beginning, middle, end. It's a little bit of a mess. I couldn't tell you what the rising and falling of the line meant exactly. It could be energy or pacing or tension or conflict or emotion, or maybe some jumbled mess of all of that together. I don't really know what was going up and down on the plot line there. The character arc is, slightly arcing, but there's like no way to talk about the content of the character arc. It's not connected to the plot line in any way. There's no motivations, there's no goals, there's nothing actually there. It's just kind of this idea of, there should be a character arc. And so that's where I was about 10 years ago, I guess, is where that would put us. I'm curious, did you guys have any, when you were first doing movies or doing stories, do you have any inkling of story structure, or did you just wing it? Because I certainly did. So that was the beginning. And then what I'm going to show you next is like after 4 years-ish. So during those 4 years, I made 5 or 6 short films that I wrote and directed. And so it's kind of, I started studying story structure a little bit more formally, even though most of my studying at the time was in filmmaking, not in writing. So when I say I studied, I mean I looked at it every 6 months and found some new thoughts that I incorporated into my writing. It's not like I was studying it for 4 years. But I did learn about writing just because I was going all the way through the project from beginning to end. Had to have a script, had to have a concept, have to have a script, have to shoot it, have to edit it, and bring it all the way. So you learn a lot about story by having to change it so many times, because it changes when you shoot it and it changes when you edit it, and you keep refining and refining in the story, so you know more about how the story is supposed to go through that process. I did look at and see and try to understand some of the really well-known story structures, like Save the Cat, Speed Cheat, or The Hero's Journey, but those are designed for feature films, and I had a really hard time wrapping my head around trying to condense them down into a short film. There's just so many beats and points, and The Hero's Journey isn't for feature film, it's for all stories for the last 3,000 years or something like that, but it's quite complex and involved. I don't know if anyone has actually looked at The Hero's Journey, and it's I don't understand how I could condense this down into 5 minutes or even 20 minutes. So I just kind of gave up on trying to follow a formula, and I kind of made up my own based off, again, my experience and the little bits and pieces that I could kind of grasp. So when I'm showing you this next kind of diagram of how I understood structure, again, this is for short films specifically, because that's what I was trying to create a formula for, or a format for. And what we did was a lot of action short films. So this was specifically for action short films. And I'm kind of excited to show you this because I think it still works for a short film. Here. It's, yeah, I think it's still pretty functional. In fact, I wrote a short film 3 years ago, I think, is when I finished writing the last short film that I wrote. Well, actually, I've written a script since then, but we didn't make the movie. So the last script that I wrote that got turned into a movie was a short film 3 years ago. And I still used this, mostly. So we can go over it. When I start developing the story, the first thing I start with is the moment of choice, which is over on the kind of right-hand side of the screen. The moment of choice, and this is exactly what it sounds like. It's usually a pivotal choice that the protagonist has to make. So deciding on this choice that the protagonist is going to make comes down to settling on your narrative. Like, what is your story about? What topic are you tackling? There's an airplane. So if the narrative was about telling the truth, no matter how hard it is, then the choice had to be centered around two options, which is to tell an important truth or to capitulate because of fear or confusion and perpetuate a lie. So the choice immediately sets up kind of this double-sided thing where you're gonna spend the whole movie setting up why the protagonist might choose either of those options, like the pros and cons of making this choice. Once we decided on a choice, or I decided on a choice, the plot works on a framework of 3 key action scenes, and I've kind of labeled these Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, because that's where they're supposed to fall. Especially the first action scene would always kind of fall at the end of Act 1, so this is like what happens in that action scene will pivot the story into Act 2. And often, if the whole film was just one long action scene, like the Star Wars films that we did, if you've seen any of those, where it doesn't feel like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, what we would label them as actually Fight 1, Fight 2, Fight 3, and the choreography would actually be broken up that way, and they would often be just like little conversation beats between Fight 1, Fight 2, Fight 3. And what we would try to do is that the objective would change. So Act 1 is all about just establishing the characters, why they're here, what they're trying to do, why there's conflict going on. And you might set that up a little bit and then have a fight action scene that moves forward into the second act. And you can see I've kind of put like this idea of connective tissue scenes. That's if it was like a longer short film. We could put in some dialogue scene or some traveling scenes. You can see how this is still pretty vague. Like, it's kind of like, you could do things with this space here, but there's no like direction on what to actually do with them. And then when you get to the second action scene, this is usually like the most intense one. It's where you're really seeing character tactics. You're seeing how the characters fight, how they react to stressful situations. You might have some dialogue that's about their background, their history, how they became who they are, why they think what they do, why they believe what they do. And if you're having characters clash, you have them point out each other's fear and weaknesses. Or, you know, if you're just doing like straight action scene, we often would just not have the dialogue, but the action itself would be centered around, fears and weaknesses. You hesitate here, or you're too aggressive because you're afraid, and that's just played out through the conflict and not through dialogue necessarily. Then you get to the moment of choice. Now, the only rule about the moment of choice is that it has to take place somewhere after the second act. It could be right at the end of the second act. Like, the second act could ramp up right to the moment of choice. And that's what kind of catapults you into the third act, is the fallout of that choice. Or, like in The Road We Take, which is the short film that I wrote only 3 years ago, the choice actually happens, like, at the end of Act 3. Like, we go all the way through Act 2, all the way through Act 3, and then it happens right at the end. So, the moment of choice can really move around however you like for what makes sense for the story. And then Act 3 is just kind of full of... I viewed it very much as, like, Act 1 introduces the protagonist and the antagonist and why they're fighting. And then Act 2, things get all kind of messy with different motivations and different goals and different side quests, possibly. And then we get back to Act 3, and it's right back down to those two characters again. The protagonist, the antagonist, going up against each other. But now you understand more of the complexities going on in their conflict. So we have the usual Act 3 activities, raise the stakes. We understand now that if the bad guy wins, we understand what's going to happen. We have the dark moment where it seems like the protagonist is going to lose, and then somehow it turns to victory, usually because of the choice. That's the most convenient place for the choice, I must say, is like how the protagonist wins in that moment of victory is because of the choice that they make. And then, of course, there's the fallout from the choice and the fallout from the victory. So it's vague. It's got a lot of loosey-goosey elements of, you could just, kind of put things here. And again, it's because I was still going a lot off of intuition and just like, hey, we need a scene where these characters talk about something like this so that we understand it. Hey, we need a scene where they fight over this, which says this about the characters, and this would be a cool scene. There's just a lot of that goes on with this kind of very general structure. I'm reading my notes to see where we are. So, I'm trying to make this more concrete maybe and think of an example from one of our short films that I can kind of go through. And probably one of them is Save Lives, Apologize is like dead on for this formula. It's so Save Lives, Apologize opens with the grown-ups, the superhero, and the mad scientist. So we introduce the characters. They're talking on the rooftop. They're talking about their goals. I want to blow up the world. I want to stop you. We get a sense of the conflict. And then that scene actually ends with the mad scientist going, oh, it's because of all this thing that happened when we were children, and blah, 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 blah. We cut back to when they're children, right? And so that's kind of the end of Act 1. We've introduced all of the things that we need to for Act 1. That offer, or if he's going to become bitter and a mad scientist determined to destroy the world, and we see him take the offer and decide to be friends. Kind of the gimmick of the short film is that all of the stuff with the grown-ups, with the superhero and the mad scientist, that was just all in the superhero kid's head. It was him realizing the consequences of his choice in the future. Like, if you're not kind to this kid now, think of how bitterness and resentment can turn him into a mad scientist and who's going to destroy the world. And you could change it now by just being nice. Hence the title, Save Lives, Apologize. So they make their choices, and our dark moment is pretty much just we're not sure if the mad scientist kid is gonna, he like turns away. We're not sure he's gonna take the offer for a minute, but he chooses to because of the kindness and the honesty of the superhero. And then the fallout of the choices, he never turns into a mad scientist. They remain friends. And the credits. I'm not sure I explained that terribly well because it's been a long time since I've seen that short film. But that's kind of the idea. I will say kind of the biggest weak area, I think, on this formula is there's not a lot of room for creating good villains because it's kind of just all focused on the protagonist's journey, which is good. You want a strong protagonist journey, but like, where's room for the villain? How do you factor in other characters? There's just not a lot of formula for any of that. So there's still a lot of separation between like the characters and the inner conflict and then the plot and the outer conflict, right? So I think the one that's really obvious to me on that is Descent. The bad guy in Descent, you have no idea why he's doing anything or what he's doing even for half of the film. But that's okay. In Descent, it's a short film, and so you have to have a really tight lens, and the Descent is just about getting our protagonist to that going through the inner journey to get to this sacrificial choice that she makes near the end of the movie. So it works for short films where you can kind of hold all the loosey-goosiness in your head. It works for short films where you can kind of hold all the loosey-goosiness in your head, and you know, it's just contained enough because it's a short film that you don't need a ton of structure to prop you up. At least I didn't feel the need for more structure to prop me up. I don't know if you guys can hear the road noise. This is the first time I filmed here at our new house, and so I wasn't sure how the noise would go. Okay. Messing with my settings. So this is where I was probably putting this second graph together, working on it, changing it, fiddling with it, making short films for about another 4 years. And that brings us to around the time that I started writing Match Made at Christmas. Oh, I will put this up here. This is just a list of the short films that I made during that time, if anyone wanted to go watch them to know kind of what I'm referencing. Thought I'd put that up here for you guys. Most of these are on our channel Abundant House Films, they should be. Except for The Road We Take, which is on Max Jordan's YouTube channel. So the rest of them will be on Abundant House's YouTube channel. So that was about 4 years of work, and then we started working on our first feature script, which was A Match Made at Christmas. Lizzie, my sister Lizzie, and I wrote this together, and it's around this point that I realized that, you know, that self-built structure that kind of worked for a short film, yeah, it's not gonna fly for the depth and breadth that a feature film would allow us to have. So it felt a little bit like starting from scratch. When it came to story structure, we had to do a lot of research, and most of what we researched was rom-com specific structure, because that's a thing. In case you didn't know that, there's a whole like structure formula, several in fact, if I remember correctly, for rom-coms, and then like one for Hallmark, and so we were kind of mashing them together and had to do a lot of watching and studying. And we were just looking at all story structures again, because I had looked at them a little bit coming up to that point, but you know, we looked again at Save the Cat and A Hero's Journey and things like Dan Harmon's Story Circle, and it was still kind of like, I don't quite understand how this all goes together. But we got it written, and right now is about 5 years after that. Wow, it's been 5 years since we started writing Match Made at Christmas. So not only did we finish writing it, we finished making the film, which, like I said, is its whole learning process on storytelling. And I'm also in the middle of developing 2 other feature scripts. So that's where I am right now in my experience, just so you know. I'm not an expert on story structure necessarily, but I've figured out a few things, and like I said, one of them is this 3 pillars idea that I'd never really read or heard anywhere else. That's really been helpful to me to understand how it all goes together. So let's take a look at the 3 pillars and the big picture. I think that's where we're at in the program. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and leave them in the chat, and I will stop and answer them as we go. Alright, so what is story structure? I think that's kind of the first question that got me on this 3 pillars thing, because I was like trying to like describe story structure, how I understand it, and I was like, I don't actually have a definition of it. So I looked up structure in the dictionary, and the definition of structure is the arrangement of and relations between parts of something complex. So in other words, complex things have parts, and these parts can be arranged, and they relate with one another in certain ways, and how those relationships operate and how the parts are arranged is called a structure. So this definitely qualifies for storytelling, because stories are complex. As storytellers, we all know this. It's a lot to keep straight a lot of the time. So there's a lot of parts to story structure when I sat down to think about all of everything that makes up the complexities, but the three biggest parts are what we're focusing on today, and it's what I'm calling the pillars of story structure. Here are the pillars of story structure. So we have the plot, and these definitions, here, it's on this side. The definitions that I have here are dictionary definitions of these words. So the plot, which is the main events of, a play, a novel, a movie, or a similar work, a story, the events of it. And then we have the second pillar, which is the character arc, and this is the transformation or the inner journey of a character over the course of a story. And then the last one is narrative. And the dictionary definition of a narrative is I must say, this is one of the definitions of a narrative, but it's the one that expressed how I think about it. So, a representation of a particular situation or process in such a way as to reflect or conform to an overarching set of aims or values. This might be said the moral of the story, but I think it's a little bit more complex than that in a really good way. So it's a representation of a particular situation or process, and that's what a story, you could say it is. Like when we're watching characters, they're not real people, they're representations of real ideas and realities about people, or realities about processes, or systems, the way that things work. So they're represented in such a way as to conform to an overarching set of aims or values. So you're presenting it through the lens of a particular aim towards your audience. You want your audience to feel a certain way, think a certain way, experience something a certain way, or values. You're trying to elucidate your values through how you are representing whatever it is you're representing through the characters. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around at first. So we have the events, we have the inner journey, and we have the aims or the values you are representing through the events and the inner journey or the transformational process of the characters. And maybe to help kind of show what parts, why I think these are the pillars, it's because each of these has their own structure. They have little mini structures. They have their own complex things that have all their own parts that work together. And so maybe it'll help understand the difference between plot, character arc, and narrative if we look kind of at what is involved in them. So these are some parts of plot. It's not necessarily all of them, just some of them, but you get kind of the idea of what is being grouped together here maybe. So we have acts, sequences, we have scenes, beats, we have the external conflict, the bad guys versus the good guys, or there's the list man versus man, man versus woman, man versus world, man versus himself is the inner conflict though. But so we have the external conflict, we have setups and payoffs, we have points of no return, reversals, plot twists, the setting, the pacing. All of these are parts of plotting, parts of the plot. Not parts of the character, not parts of the narrative. Here's some parts of the character arc. Motivation, goals, backstory, character voice, the character's inner conflict, weakness, wound, spine, misbelief. Again, this isn't everything, but these are some of the major ideas that are involved in the character arc. Some other ones might be choice. I got misbelief on there. What else am I thinking of? You could put values on this list, maybe. Like part of the character arc is what the deep values of the character. You know, what are the lines they will not cross? What are the actions they view as non-negotiable? You know, they see someone in trouble, they're going to help because that's a value that they have. Or they see someone in trouble and they're going to run the other way because that's a value that they have. And so that's built into the character arc as well. And then the parts of narrative, we have theme, truth, patterns, systems, processes, revelations, and identity. So you can kind of see this is a different part of storytelling. It's one that I don't feel like is talked about very much until you maybe start writing features. I definitely know nobody ever talked about this when I was writing short films. Like the books that I was reading didn't really touch narrative beyond maybe, hey, perhaps you should have a theme. And narrative is what I was trying to capture, I think, when I had that little climax flag, you know, at the peak of the plot line, or the moment of choice really came out of the narrative that you were trying to tell. You're telling a story about telling the truth. And so that was your narrative, and everything comes out of your narrative. You have to know the truth about telling the truth. You have to understand the patterns. Maybe we choose a different example than truth because I feel like that is confusing. I don't know, sacrifice. So if sacrifice is your theme, and a theme is another one of those things where you read a book and everyone has a different definition of what the theme is. For me, theme is the general subject, and then theme statement, which is, I think, from the Anatomy of Story, what the Anatomy of Story calls it. The theme statement is what you are trying to say about the theme. So, you know, if the theme is sacrifice, it's a very general thought, then your theme statement would be sacrifice is necessary to maintain good in the world, possibly maintain faith or trust in people in the world or something like that. You can see how once you get down to your theme statement, you really have to know what you're trying to say, because even the smallest little change to the theme statement can have big ramifications in the rest of the story. Because if you think about that moment of choice again, if the theme is sacrifice is necessary to maintain the ability for people to have trust in one another, that's one theme statement. Another theme statement might be sacrifice is necessary to keep the world going. And you can see, you just took like the concept of people trusting in each other out of the second one, and it's a completely different story to me. Like the second one, where it's just to keep the world going, to me that has a lot of like ideas about nature and the circle of life, and things have to die so that other things may live, whereas the other one is about people willing to put themselves out for people who don't deserve it. And so you see, like, they're different stories, even though the theme statement is so close. So theme, truth, patterns. You have to understand patterns that perpetuate sacrifice as a value, and patterns that disincentivize sacrifice as a value. Same with systems, processes. You have to understand how someone gets to the point of being willing to sacrifice for other people or not sacrifice for other people. Like, what is the process and also the process that makes it necessary for people to sacrifice. You know, the malicious people in the world who take what's not theirs or kill people who they shouldn't, and it makes it necessary because everyone has sinned, and it causes ripples around to everyone around them. Those people then have to sacrifice many things. Sacrifice their time, sacrifice their money, sacrifice their right to revenge, even if we're going to continue together as people who can trust one another. So you had kind of like the idea of narrative comes along with all of these other things that you can look at, angles that you can look at, for how these things work in reality. Systems, processes, revelation, and identity. Now I'm questioning if identity belongs on there or it belongs on character arc. This is what comes when you rush through your preparations and you didn't have time to answer your own questions about this. We're just gonna leave that one there. We'll get back to that in a different live stream, I'm sure, at some point. So I'm gonna take a drink. So, here's some, now that we've kind of outlined the pillars, the 3 pillars of storytelling, here's some common issues that I think come up when people say storytelling. And the first one is when we're talking about storytelling, or when we're talking about story structure, and one person thinks you're talking about the plot, and the other person is talking about what I'm talking about, which is all 3 of these things kind of working together. So, plot does have its own structure. Like I said, each one of these pillars has their own structure. And so you can see where the confusion happens if one person's talking about just the plot and the other person is talking about story structure. And I guess it's just not how I view it. I'm curious to know, do you guys think of plot and story structure as separate, or is plot as only part of story structure, not the entirety of it? So when I'm referring to story structure, I'm not talking about the events of the story, which is what the plot is. I'm not talking about how the plot should be organized or structured or, you know, laid out on a graph or anything like that. I'm talking about all 3 of character arc, plot, so the events, the transformational journey of the character, and the what did we call it? Dang it. The aims or values through which we are viewing how we're representing the characters in the plot, the narrative. Max, do you say part of? I'm assuming he's writing more, so we'll wait just a sec. Another issue that comes up is just forgetting about narrative altogether. Like I said, this isn't really talked about in books, or if narrative is talked about in like videos about writing or teachings about writing, I haven't really seen where it's explained how to do it, except for in the Anatomy of Story, and Story Genius is the new book that I've been reading that's about this, specifically about narrative, and how central it is to storytelling. So if you want to know about narrative, read Anatomy of Story, though. It's brilliant. Otherwise, I think where you see narrative and where I've gotten a better grasp of narrative is watching essays that kind of critique and break apart films. So YouTube video essays are really great for this. They'll take a film, they'll talk about the deeper meanings, they'll talk about how it's structured to show the deeper meanings, how the characters, how the filmmakers are showing the deeper meanings through how the characters move, how they're dressed, the way the locations, the sequences move through the locations, like all that sort of stuff is what they talk about a lot in video essays. So if you want to like wrap your head around narrative, that's where I would go. I think the not understanding narrative is one of the biggest problems with storytelling in Hollywood, I should say, today. Do you guys get the feeling that writers are just not taught how to have a story that means something? Or they're trying to mean something, but they just kind of vaguely reference it instead of actually making it mean something? Here's a strong female character who's not strong or very feminine. Like, none of their actions or choices or personality fits that description. Yet, everyone calls them one, and they look kind of like one, macho or tough or cool girl, boss babe. But it's just like, this should mean something, but it doesn't in the story. And I think there's a couple of reasons why narrative is being left behind in this generation of storytellers, unfortunately. They're scared of meaning anything because someone might be offended by it. I'm confused on that point because they seem so proud of what these things are supposed to mean. It really, really means something to minorities that they're represented this way on screen. Represented what way? You didn't say anything. They're just on screen, and I guess you can be proud of that accomplishment, but it's not a writing accomplishment. Anyway. Not to say there are some good writers and good shows that you can, mostly shows, not a lot of movies, I would say, that have good narratives, or good representation. But yes. So that's one of the issues. The last issue that kind of came to mind when talking about story structure, and this was the camp that I fell into, why it took me so long to kind of understand this, is I would think of plot and character arc as completely separate things instead of like pieces of the same entity. And this led to some weird, like, you could see it on that first graph where it was like, here's the plot line, here's the character arc, like, they don't interact at all, there's nothing tying them together. And sometimes I hear writers talking about balancing like the plot and the character. You want enough plot, but you want enough character, and I feel like that is a false binary, that it's just a false understanding of how it all goes, and it leads to this idea of like, okay, here's a plot beat, and now here's a character beat, and here's a plot sequence, and here's a character sequence or a scene. Like, I would literally label that have little labels in my head like that. It would be like, and this is a character moment, and this is a plot scene. I think that studios will do as little work as possible to create a profitable product, so often they don't go the extra mile to give you a good movie. Indeed. It's also just hearing, I don't know if you read very much about the writer's strike last year, I think is when it happened. But one of the things that they were striking about was that TV shows no longer have, 30 episodes, 20 to 30 episodes a season. They only have like 8 to 15, 6 to 15, And that meant that if you were a writer, you had to book like 2 or 3 shows a year in order to make a living, because you weren't writing 30 episodes, you were only writing 8, and you only get paid for the time that you spent, right? So Just the model changed completely, but I realized what that meant. If you look at like the credits of a lot of the good screenwriters, the good show writers, they earn their stripes in TV by having to crank out so much writing and so many episodes. And you know, the TV environment is so collaborative because you usually have 4 or 5 writers, so you are able to learn a lot and have to collaborate a lot. And so basically that training ground has been eliminated for the next couple generations of writers. They're not getting, you know, they don't get to come on as a rookie writer with all of these more experienced writers, and really run through the gamut of different getting to know the characters really deep, but doing all these different plots with the characters, holding a long narrative together. Like, there's so many skills that you learn in TV and that you don't get with an 8-episode show. And so you can, like, I've been grappling with this too, of if you're trying to make a living as a writer, but you only can get paid per movie that you write or per episode that you write when movies are getting scarce or shows are getting shorter. How do you get the training ground that you need to just really get comfortable in it? So I think that's another factor. Writers are not as good as they used to be. So, anywho, you like the shorter series, but that's because they're better quality. Shame they're getting paid so much less to do what you think is better work. It's different. It's different quality. It's closer to movie quality. But it's a different kind of quality, because there are like, I'm gonna do it again, procedural shows, whatever, that still go, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. We watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It was a ton of fun. And very quality writing. It's just a different kind of quality, I guess. Okay, so anyway, when I would think of, here's character, here's plot, then it would be, hey, let's stop our action scene so our character can have a monologue about why they're doing what they're doing. And you can literally feel the disconnect happening. Plot moment, character moment, instead of them working together. So I think the parallel lines, like how I would think about it, like I kind of have on that first graph, it's just the wrong way to think about it. And I sat and thought for a hot minute about what would be the correct image for how to think about how this works together. So we've looked at the parts, and now we're going to look at the relationship between the parts. We're still looking at structure. Story structure. So the connection between the character arc and the plot is not a alternating connection. You don't have one happen and then another happen. You have to pause forward movement, hop over to the other track to make forward movement, and then jump back over and catch that one up. It's just not how it works. The connection between them is a cause and effect connection, and the image that I think expresses this the best with narrative involved is the human body. Because the human body moves like a story moves. Okay, stop. So the plot is the skeleton, the bones, the structure. It gives the whole story a shape, just like your skeleton gives your body a shape. It's the frame that everything kind of hangs on, right? Gives the whole story. The plot gives your story a shape that looks like a story. It looks like a movie. It has the pieces, and the pieces move like how a movie feels. The character arc, and then I wrote some other things on here because I was feeling goofy. Less time to get to the good parts. Indeed. Indeed. I think it's becoming apparent, Lily. Wait a minute. It's when I became a parent that I started wanting entertainment that was a little less high stakes, because I get interrupted so much. You know, I don't sit down and watch a movie, and so I'm walking away to deal with the kid. I'm walking away to get a snack, and so I want entertainment. A lot of times that's just kind of like, it doesn't matter if I miss a few minutes most of the time. I stopped watching shows that were that quality, where it takes less time to get to the good parts, because I was like, I'm just missing everything and I want to sit down and focus and follow it. There's too much going on. Anyway. I think what helped me understand this the best was the idea of like empty scenes. So in a plot line, there's the scene where you introduce the protagonist. But when you're looking at your story, that's where you would bring in who the protagonist is and how you meet them. So the plot just kind of has all of these empty buckets of scenes. It's like, here we meet the protagonist, here we meet the antagonist, and here's where they fight, you know, and there's scenes, and so the character arc can kind of come in and fill the buckets with the particulars of your story. But the plot just kind of is there to start hanging things on, to make it look pretty. The character arc is the muscles. Without the muscles, the bones can't move. So the plot line and the character arc are not like two parallel lines that sometimes, you know, they happen to interconnect and affect each other sometimes. It's not even that. It's that the movement of the character is what powers the plot forward. The character is the part that moves and makes us move from the empty bucket scenes to the empty bucket scenes. It's why we care, why we're watching that sort of thing. So this is why you need a character who has conflict, who has a goal, who's broken in some way that needs to be fixed, because those are the characters that have a reason to move. You know, if there's character, everything's great, they don't need anything, they are happy where they are, they're not gonna move. You can't take the plot anywhere because the muscles aren't gonna move the bones. So, you know, it could even be forward or backward movement if you have a, what do we call that again? A character arc that is... Somebody help me! Oh my gosh. My silly brain. A negative character arc? There's a name for this. Is it a negative character arc? I think it's a negative character arc. So if you have a negative character arc, this could even be for the antagonist or the protagonist, there still has to be, you know, something there that they need something, or they want something, or they're broken in some way that's causing them to move. Reasons to fight or to flee or to search. We need movement. And so that has to be built into the character. Why they have all of their own structure, so you can set all of that up correctly to move with the plot well. And I threw this cheesy line on the graphic. The heart is the most important muscle of all. But it is true that the character and getting to the heart of that need, of that brokenness, of that desire in the character, getting to the heart of it and how that feels and why, that's going to be the heartbeat of your story. And so that's an important piece of the character arc to get, is to get all the way down to the heart of what this character is and where they're going and why, and all of the things that make up character. All right, so how does the narrative fit in. The narrative is the nervous system. So the nervous system is the body's command center. So it allows all of the different parts to communicate to the brain, and then the brain communicates back and tells all the parts what to do. So your muscles, your characters are the things that are actually moving, but your nervous system is the mechanism through which your brain tells your muscles where to move. And your brain is what processes why. Why are we moving? So your muscles, they can move, but they don't know why they're moving or where they're moving. And if your right arm is the protagonist and your left arm is the antagonist, the characters, the muscles themselves don't understand that they're being coordinated and that they're connected in some way, but the nervous system does. And that's what the narrative does. The narrative is what connects all of everything together, because it's this understanding of what you're representing and how you're representing it. What you're representing, the aims, the values, through the events and through the character arc. So it's not just true that, like your nerves connect your arms to your brain, which connects them together. Characters don't just connect to each other, they also connect to their world. They connect to their inner conflict. They connect to the outer conflict, to all the other characters and relationships that they have. And all of that can be at the disposal of the narrative. So, like in the hero's journey, I don't know if you remember how the circle goes. You start in the familiar world and you go to the unfamiliar world or out into the wilderness. I can't remember the exact label for it, but as you move around the circle, that's how it goes. I'm probably going backwards than how it actually goes looking on the screen. But why does the protagonist journey through an unfamiliar world? And it's a narrative question. It's because to grow, you have to go places you've never gone before. It's unfamiliar. You have to do different things differently than you ever have. And so the environment, the arena, the setting, all of that gets connected to narrative and how the events, how the characters are representing the values and the whatever you're aiming to represent. So, narrative connects your story to reality, and it offers insight into reality. Could be insight about whatever you want, those values, those set of ideas. It could be insight about human relationships. It could be generational cycles. It could be the process of growth, struggle of the human spirit. Like, there's all of these realities of being people, being humans, and realities of how the world works and how we interact with the world, how we interact with each other. And that's what narrative does. It allows your story to be connected to those realities. So, story structure, if you look at it all, we got the plot, we got the characters, we got the narrative. It's about taking concepts of reality, principles, truths of reality, and making them become manifest through the characters and the relationships of the characters, and which they operate in their, they play out, I should say. They play out that concept. They play out those ideas or that set of processes or set of relationships in our imaginary world, in our plot. And that's how it's set up. It's like the plot is pulled from the characters, but the characters are pulled from the narrative. And so it's not that you kind of move one, you kind of move the other. It's that they're all kind of moving together, just like your arm would move, your bones, your muscles, your nerves all together. what story is, right, is that trying to communicate realities and concepts about reality and truths and principles. Because you could just say them, you know, you can just say what these things are, but what story allows you to do is explore it with a lot more nuance, with a lot more, with an eye on what would you call it? Maybe like time passing. Like stories factor in time and factor in process in a way that just like saying the principle. Like Newton wrote down and expressed the principles of gravity, right? I have the right physicist. No. You guys are gonna murder me. What do you call a physics person? Is it a physicist? My brain is... Anyway. Where is it going? Gravity. Gravity is principles of reality. Newton wrote them down. He expressed them. And they're just kind of like there. But I wanted to understand what gravity feels like, what it looks like, how it affects people. Like, there's all these different angles we could take up. And that's what a story does. And the reason we have these layers, we have narrative, and then the characters, and then the plot, is because narrative is on the conceptual level, and concepts are not connected to a timeline, a showing of a process. A concept can't be a story, because it can't walk, and it can't talk, and it can't make choices. So you take the concept, and you represent it through the characters. And then the characters... Oh, I have more to say there. You take the concept and you represent it through the characters. Take the concept of revenge, for instance, to bring that into the story world and out of like the conceptual world, the idea of revenge. You have to create two characters, one who is wronged by the other and now seeks revenge against that person. And now we understand what revenge is through the context of a relationship. And that's how characters are created out of the narrative. You want to understand the concept through relationships between the characters, relationships between the characters in the world, and relationships between the characters and themselves. Narrative also asks the questions surrounding the concept: what ends will someone go to achieve revenge? What does harboring revenge in your heart do to you as a person? How do you achieve a satisfactory revenge? Can revenge lead to satisfaction? What is the difference between revenge and justice? What is the fallout of succeeding in exacting your revenge? And how does all of that affect the relationships of everyone involved? And then there's other concepts that get intertwined there, right? Like justice or betrayal or forgiveness. And narrative allows you, story I should say, because it's all of it together, allows you to understand the connection between revenge and forgiveness, or revenge and betrayal, potentially, and how you've set up the characters, their relationships, their struggles, and the actions they're going to take in the plot line. And that's why you kind of have plot as the top layer, because characters, again, they have to move, they have to do things, there's events that have to happen where they conflict with one another, where they make choices, where they take actions, and all of that, all of their discussion, all of their actions, all of their choices express the questions, the angle, the values that you are trying to cover. You're trying to inquire into. It covers all the questions, and it also covers the conclusions that you come to, right? You have your theme, here's revenge, here's all these questions about revenge, and your theme statement ends up being your conclusion after investigating all these questions. So, narrative drives the creation of the characters, and the characters drive the plot. They're not separate things that kind of interconnect every so often. They're like layers of the same thing, if that makes sense. And I'm going to just say it differently one more time. I'm like saying the same thing over and over, just differently kind of each time. The top layer is the plot. We're going to go downward this time. The top layer is the plot, which is the arena where the outer conflict is happening, the movement, the outer conflict itself. A layer lower is the characters, which is the people and their values and their motivations, and those things drive choices, and those things drive actions, which plops them up into, you know, your characters. They take actions, and so now they're operating on the plot layer here, but it's because of who they are and what they are, which is the character arc layer. And the layer below that, the narrative, is the theme, the meaning, the questions and perspectives that bringing cohesion to all of the characters and all of the plot. Like, why is this happening all together? It's because it's a system. It's because it's a pattern. It's because it's a process. It ties it all together. We understand why these characters are in the conflict, why they're the central characters and not the side characters, and all that sort of stuff is viewed through the lens of narrative. And why I think the layers work that way is because it just echoes real life, right? The beliefs that are central to our being, our values, our aims, things, our narrative, our life narrative, what we believe about ourselves, false beliefs and true beliefs, right? They affect our character, our personality, our goals, our motivations, our attitudes towards life, and those, it's out of that we act and we make choices. They're not separate from each other, you know? And when talking about a timeline, it's our actions, our choices that actually like create our life path, you know? So there's that, the 3 pillars of story structure, laid out to the best of my ability when I had to rush through getting prepared for this, which is why some of this is repetitive, because I didn't have time to like sort through what would be the best way to represent it. But I am hopefully getting my point across. You guys let me know if you have questions. Hey, Johnston. Glad you could pop in for a second. So the way YouTube works, I don't know if you know, you'd mentioned wanting to watch the whole video back if you get the chance to. It won't, like, this video won't pop up in like my videos on my Homegrown Filmmaker channel. You have to go to the live tab to find the video. I will also try to post it in the Homegrown Filmmaker Facebook group, or maybe I do it on Instagram. I'll find a way to maybe tag you in it. Anyway, you like the anatomy analogies? Hey, thanks, Lily. My first analogy was a car, and I was like, this isn't working for me. This is not quite what I was envisioning. All right. So hopefully some of this is making sense. It's hard to wrap your head around without concrete examples, and I think that's actually going to be either my next live stream. Like, I was thinking maybe I could do 3 more live streams where I kind of take each pillar and break it apart with examples so we can take a look at it a little bit better. I don't know if I'm going to end up doing that, or I'm just going to skip straight to narrative, because I already have a good example of a film to look at the narrative, because I think this film is broken because of the narrative. And if we could fix the narrative, it might fix the other problems, and so it'd be fun to take a look at. I'm not good at plot, actually. I haven't really dived deeply enough into plot to understand how it works, and so that might be a difficult video to put together. when you take plot as an isolated element, what makes a good plot? I have not answered that question for myself. Maybe I should do a video on it then. All right. Now, I did have a thought about looking at some examples, hopefully, to kind of look at this. And now I want to look at some well-known, like, story structure formulas or plot structures. We're going to look at them and be like, hey, are you, like, incorporating all 3 pillars of storytelling, or are you just a plot line? Are you giving us understanding on how to weave these things together to make a story? So the first one that I have here is something called, I don't know how to pronounce it, I believe it's German, Freytag's I'm probably butchering that, Freytag's pyramid, which is a graph that became popularized in the 1800s by this German guy, Freytag. He's a playwright, I believe. So I haven't actually looked at these. I just kind of threw a bunch into my presentation here. And so we're going to look at these together for the first time and kind of discuss, is this a plot line or is this like a story structure? So we start out with flat line of exposition. I'm assuming this covers who, what, when, where, and how sort of questions. Who are we watching? Why are we watching them? What are they doing? All those questions. And we get to the bottom of the pyramid and we have the first inciting incident. I'm assuming these formulas have like books or articles written to go alongside to kind of explain, but if we're familiar enough with the language, then I don't know if we need to go through all of that. So the inciting incident is where the quest, the storyline, the entrance or the invitation into the unfamiliar world happens. We often maybe get a glimpse at our bad guy. We at least get a glimpse of our conflict. So maybe we do need to look at the article because it would tell us whether they're incorporating character and narrative. If we're just looking at the graph, there's not a lot of like, this looks kind of like a bucket of scenes to me. You guys, you know what I'm talking about with the plot line. We got scenes that tell us who, what, when, where, and how. We got a scene where the conflict and the quest kind of starts, and then we got scenes that kind of up the ante, the characters doing things, and then we got a scene where things go bad, and then we get to the climax, which is a scene where things get resolved, maybe? I don't know, this is an old one, so it won't correspond quite with like our modern sense of media. We have the climax, and then we have reversal. That's an area where I don't know exactly what's going on there. I would need to look at the documentation that I assume goes along with this. Oh, maybe reversal is like victory. It's like maybe climax is where things come to a head, where it's do or die, all the stakes, conflict with the bad guy. Reversal is where fortunes are reversed, good guy wins. We have the falling out of that, and then a resolution. So resolution is the only one here that doesn't exactly feel like a scene bucket, because it's just kind of like resolving what? Just the conflict between the good guy and the bad guy. And then the denouement, which is just the fallout of however the story ended. We need to close up all our loose ends and see where we left the character. So it's pretty vague. It kind of applies to all stories, but maybe that was the idea, just to give a little basic structure, some bones, some skeleton. This one feels like a plot line to me. What do you guys think? The next one that I was going to look at is the hero's journey. And, hang on, let me fix it. If I can. Okay, we're just gonna have to have some little awkward gaps here on the sides, but that's what I'll do. So the hero's journey is pretty complex. This is by Joseph Campbell from his book A Hero with a Thousand Faces. This is like the story structure that everyone references, where he kind of looked at a lot of like classic stories all the way up until the modern time. I believe this was in like the 70s maybe when A Hero with a Thousand Faces it was published. It's like at least post 70s, but it was looking at all of these famous myths and stories throughout all of time and kind of condensing all of the common story points to a structure. So I already know this definitely incorporates a lot of narrative into it. And so the idea is that the character is journeying, makes a full circle with their journey. They start in a familiar world, they're going to journey out into the wild, into the special world is what it calls it on this one, before their journey will bring them back home, and they're going to pass through lots of different plot points on the way. So we do have the separation into acts. I feel like, I wonder if I have a pointer or something. I don't know how I would do that because you can't see exactly what I'm like circling and whatnot. So the first block of kind of beats, I guess is what I would call them, because I don't know if they're actually plot points or not yet. So we have the ordinary world and the call to adventure. So we establish the character in their world. This is definitely having to do with the narrative, right? That this is the world that has made the character who they are. And that's explaining a process. That's explaining a relationship and a symptom, or a system, that sort of thing. And then the call to adventure. Here comes the conflict of a knocking. And then the next plot beat is a hook, and then the bargain without knowing, or the refusal of the call. The refusal of the call is definitely like the more well-known one there, where because of relationships that the main character has, either with their home or with the characters there, they're going to refuse the adventure. Even though there's part of them that longs for the adventure, they're going to say, no, that's not where I should be. Or it could be about fear. I don't want to go out there. That's not who I am. Questions about identity. So all of that has to do with character and narrative, right? Meet the mentor, supernatural aid in meeting the white spirit. This is where I need some explanation, because we get into some weird titles where I'm like, I'm not exactly sure what that is supposed to be. Road of trials and tests, the whale's belly, enemies, allies, obstacles. So again, this is incorporating plot points and character and narrative pretty well. We got enemies, which is more characters. Allies, we're exploring the relationships. But this is mostly plot and character, I would say. Exploring relationships, exploring the character, and we're moving through plot points. And we get to the first threshold, and we're leaving the special world. One of the best like examples of the hero's journey, obviously, well, maybe we should do Star Wars, because Star Wars is A New Hope is the like classic, supposed to be the classic, wow, my brain is not helping me today, example of the hero's journey. So we got Luke, he's a moisture farmer, right? He gets called to a adventure. He meets Obi-Wan, which is meeting the mentor. He's like, hey, you should become a Jedi. But he says, no, I belong here. I'm a farm boy and I have responsibilities. And then bad guys strike. We meet the enemies. We also meet Princess Leia, our allies. We experience some obstacles. We meet Han Solo and Chewbacca. And would the whale's belly be going to the Death Star? Gosh, my brain is not firing on all cylinders today. Oops. Hang on. Anyway, if you wanted to look more at the hero's journey, you could really look through it, but it definitely does a good job of incorporating room for narrative, questions that lead you to exploring the narrative and the characters. It's just really complex. I find it to be very complex, and it, like I said, I can't boil it down to a short film. Maybe you could take some of the larger concepts that are on this to boil down to a short film, like the idea of the ordinary world and the special world we're going to travel to, and we have Act 1, the separation, and then Act 2, the supreme ordeal, and Act 3, unification. Like, you can incorporate these ideas in a short film structure. I don't particularly care for the hero's journey, I must say. You can tell I'm not as familiar with it. Alright, the next one is the Sidfield paradigm. This is a very famous one as well. The question is it just a plot structure with scene buckets? And just looking at it, I would kind of say yes. It's like either, it's like as soon as you get more specific to get to the narrative, like the hero's journey, like it just gets really complex because it's actually trying to grapple with narrative and be very applicable to so many stories. But then you look at this and like, okay, this is like all stories, this is all movies on the Sidfield's paradigm. It's so vague in general that I don't know that I could take much away from this. Maybe if you're reading the literature that goes with it, but it's kind of the same thing. There's an inciting incident, there's 3 acts. The tension or the action rises and then it falls. We have plot points and pinch points, and then there's a midpoint, and then there's a climax. So this is a very general one. Maybe if you just don't really have any concept of story structure at all, you could study something like this, because I feel like this is very much more applicable to like modern media than the Freytag's pyramid one is, just because it's old. It's a different structure where like the climax was in the middle of the story instead of towards the end like we do nowadays. So Sidfield's paradigm would probably be a good one to study, along with the explanations of what all of these different things are, with, if you're like, I want to know anything about of plot, I would say how to design a skeleton of your story and what it should kind of look like. The next one that I have is Save the Cat's beat sheet. This one is not a graph. And you'll find that, or I found that plot or that story structures kind of fall into three things, and maybe that's the key. If it's a graph, it's a plot line, pretty much. So there's graphs, and then there's circles, like the hero's journey is, and then there's charts. So I really like the Save the Cat beat sheet. It's the one that has made the most sense to me to pull narrative, character, and plot together. Because there's plot points on here, and then there's also explanations of what the characters should be doing. So the first beat is an opening image, and that's like a plot point, right? It's like, scene bucket, tell me, set your tone and style, what your movie is going to be like. We need to understand where we're starting from. And then theme stated is like this perfect scene. It is a scene bucket, but it's exactly set up to start incorporating your narrative from the beginning of your story. Setup, we set up the hero, the stakes, and the goal. This is all about character. It's kind of scene bucket-y. It's like, here's all the scenes that you should have here that's set up. But not even that. I wouldn't say that one's less scene bucket-y, I guess. Set up hero, stakes, and goal, grab the audience, introduce your main characters. It's not saying you have to have a scene where your main character does this, and he talks to his mom, and he gets into trouble or has the inciting incident or whatever. It's just, we need some scenes to show the character what they want, what's at stake for them, that sort of thing. Okay, but inciting incident, catalyst, is a scene bucket, right? Life-changing moment disguised as bad news. Now it's a scene bucket. We know that scene has to happen. Debate is a connection point between narrative and character, because it's about your character is debating whether they should go on the adventure. It's kind of this refusal of the call. You can kind of see the overlap there, but it's also connected to the narrative, because what the character ends up debating is their point of view on the theme or the narrative, which is important. And it's gonna, should the hero take up her call, it usually ends up with yes, or she's forced to. You know, we come to a conclusion of what the character thinks about the theme, or what they think about their identity or their place in this world. My place in this world. Sorry, I couldn't resist. All right, break into 2. The moment we leave the old world. Hey, that sounds familiar. Overlap with the hero's journey again, and enter the new world of Act 2. So this is a point where character, plot, and narrative meet, because it's a scene, right? We need this moment where we're leaving it all behind. We say goodbye. We can't go back. Like there's a scene bucket for you, but we have to understand what that means to the character, why they're doing it, what they're scared of, what they're fleeing from or running towards, and we enter the new world. And like I said, the new world needs to be shaped by the narrative. What is this new world? It's both on a plot level, as in a new setting, a new arena, but it's also the character. We're off on the adventure. We're dealing with things we've never dealt with before. So anyway, we don't have to go through all of it, but this is why I like Save the Cat. I feel like it does a really good job of, like, scene buckets. Here's your plot structure, your skeleton, but also leaving room and telling you where the spaces are that you need to fill with character and with narrative. The next one I have on here is Dan Harmon's circle structure. This is one of the only ones that I have found is quite applicable to short films. I don't connect with it personally. I feel like, again, there's still a little too much vagueness and gaps in space and whatever that I haven't really used it. I haven't felt much that's applicable that I didn't already have, but it might really make sense to you and connect with you. And I think it does a pretty good job of connecting all the things together. So we got you. There's the character right there. Establish the protagonist, a character in a zone of comfort. So if we do this right, we've already got plot, character, narrative going on right there, because we have our little scene buckets. We need to meet the character. We need to see their world. Those are scene buckets. We need to see the character, obviously. And then, again, what I said about on the hero's journey. I actually feel like Dan Harmon's story circle is a major, like, simplification of the hero's journey, which is a relief. We're seeing the world that shaped them, that made them who they are. All of that's narrative sort of stuff. We're looking at relationships. We're looking at systems and processes. That sort of thing. So you need... Now we're looking at the goals, what the character is after, what are they pursuing. So the character is in a zone of comfort, but they want something, so they enter an unfamiliar situation, they search, they adapt to the unfamiliar situation, they get what they wanted, but they pay a heavy price for it, then return to their familiar situation, having changed. So, need, that's character, that could be narrative if you set it up right. It's also who they're going with, all of the outer world, the plot world things, the events that are you're setting up the events that are gonna happen, hopefully, for this character. They enter an unfamiliar situation. I don't know if you guys want me to go through all of this. It's pretty similar to the hero's journey. But I think the reason I didn't find this one connected me, it doesn't really fill the gaps, and like the Save the Cat does, it doesn't like tell you what it doesn't help you combine narratives, characters, and character arc and plot together. Like, that's what I like about Save the Cat. It likes, like, here's the point where you're going to talk, you got a plot, and here's the point where we're going to explore the characters. And I know I said that feels like going on, that sounds like when I was talking about having two different tracks, but it's not when you work with Save the Cat. It helps you kind of weave them together better. And this one I just threw in because it's why I recommend Anatomy of Story, actually, because this next one's from Anatomy of Story, because Anatomy of Story actually separates out like character and narrative as one thing and plot as another thing, but the plot includes how to incorporate the character in the narrative. I don't know how to say that differently. It's like they're two different lines. You can separate them out a little bit and combine them, and it shows you how to do that so that you can see the structure of each individually, I guess is what I would say. So the 7 key steps of story structure, this is like the narrative in the story. So your character has a weakness and need, and that's what you're introducing when you introduce them. Here's this character, they're not good at this thing, or they have this failing, they're a coward, or they're too overeager, they're prideful, whatever their weakness is. And then their need. The way the book describes this is you're going to have one of the other characters who has a relationship like express, hey, you need to grow up. Like, you think of any Adam Sandler comedy, you can totally see this scene where his sister, his mom, his best friend is like, hey, you should grow up a little bit, right? Hey, you should if your character struggles with like timidity or not believing themselves, then it's like, hey, you need to put yourself out there more and the world will accept you as you are, blah 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 blah. So the difference between the need and the desire is the need is something the character doesn't want, but it's what they need to do. The desire is, this is what I want, this is what I'm going after. And the story is going to be about how to get what they want. They need to do something they don't want to do. And then the opponent, then the plan. These are things you have to have for the narrative to work. And for the narrative to connect to the plot, I guess I would say. The opponent is pulled out of the narrative as well. The book walks you through that. The plan that the protagonist comes up with to defeat the opponent comes from his weakness and his desire. He comes up with a plan that doesn't work because he hasn't learned his lesson yet. They battle, the ultimate battle, and there's a self-realization where the character realizes to get what he wants, he has to do what he needs to do what he doesn't want to do. He has that revelation about why he doesn't want to do it and how that will change his identity and all those narrative, character-y things. And then they get back to a new equilibrium. So this isn't a plot line. That's why I separate it out, because there's no like time. There's no acts. There's no beats associated with this. This is just like, hey, this goes in this order and you need to do all of these things to have a story. And then Anatomy Story actually has like a plot line where some of these are beats on that plot line, but it's way more specific on where it goes in the first, second, or third act, how it turns into the next point, all the things you need to cover in between these things. It breaks them down into scene buckets and that sort of thing. Anywho, that was the last one that I kind of had. So that's where I'm kind of coming to an end here. That's story structure, to my understanding at least. I'm gonna hang on, I gotta find my chat window. I'm gonna need to get going here pretty soon. So that's where I was going to wrap up. It's a little abrupt because, again, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare and, like, make a summary or anything like that. So, to summarize, what I think the 3 pillars are is plot, character, and narrative. And they work together to... The character is the expression of the concepts you wish to explore in the narrative. The lens through which you are looking, they are the representation of the ideas and the values that you are inquiring into. And because characters take action, because they make choices, and they operate in a world that has time, we end up with a plot line, which is a timeline where things are linked to moments and beats, and they have an order, and that's the structure. So, I'm going to leave you with that. If you found any of this helpful, insightful, had new thoughts, new ideas, you can leave that in the comments below. I would love to read that. And I would also just like to know what you think about story structure. What's your definition of story structure? And what do you feel like is your maybe your strength or your weakness or your gaps? I know for me, plot is one of my huge gaps. Narrative is one of my fascinations. And so I'm excited to, when I have time, to intentionally lean into plot to learn more about it, so that I can kind of close that gap for myself. But that's where I'm gonna leave you guys. I hope you have a great evening. Thanks for hanging out with me as I talk about stories and structure, things that I love. I will see you next time.